Hey, it's Jordan with the Young Turks and 2YT Politics. I am here in a very nice, humid day in Wilmington, North Carolina. And behind me is the Cape Fear River. Cape Fear River wraps around about 200 miles all around Wilmington and the southern part of North Carolina. And it's been in the news really only the last week. When it was revealed, a local news outlet revealed that a pretty toxic chemical was found in the river here. Public officials knew about it that we know of about 7 months, probably earlier than that. And this chemical is linked to DuPont. DuPont, the insecticide factory, the chemical company, they have had issues everywhere from the Ohio River Valley. They have had issues in Indiana, Michigan, and just about anywhere you could think. I want to read you this from earlier this year because it's going to be connected to what we're dealing with now. So in February, the chemical giant DuPont and its spinoff Chemours company announced they would pay up to $921 million to settle roughly 3,500 Ohio Valley lawsuits over illnesses linked to a toxic chemical known as C8, which is used in making Teflon, the non-stick cookware, among other things. C8, also known as a perfluorinatic acid, is a soap-like powder that DuPont used for decades at its Washington Works plant in West Virginia to smooth lumps in freshly made Teflon. The hazards of C8 were first revealed by the public as a result of legal battles waged by attorneys in this case. They have been found to cause cancers, pregnancy problems, chronic health conditions like thyroid disease. Over the span of decades, hundreds of thousands of compounds of C8 were dumped by DuPont into the Ohio River, where it found its way into the drinking water of some 70,000 area residents. And the reason that's so important is because of C8's issues. The Environmental Protection Agency and DuPont had agreed in 2009 to change from C8 to a, I guess, slightly less toxic chemical called GenX. I'm going to let Kemp Burdett, you are with the Cape Fear River Keepers, right, which has been an organization here for 20 years. And basically, GenX, from my understanding, it's a slightly different compound than the one I just read about, but not all that different. And now it's been found here in your main drinking water source.
Right, yeah. GenX seems to be the replacement for C8, which it does all of the same things for DuPont or for Chemours, and it seems to have a lot of the same impacts, health impacts and environmental impacts. So it is slightly different. It's a slightly shorter chain, but it seems to me, and judging from the things I've read, it seems to be a fairly similar compound.
And, there have been testing mostly on animals where they found, for at least C8, they found all sorts of cancers. They found testicular cancer, pancreatic cancer, rectal cancer. They found liver issues. They found autoimmune issues. They found in female rats reproductive issues like premature birth or giving birth to very low weight, in this case, rats. And, the scientists who work for the companies, AKA tell the companies what they want to hear, basically say, well, you can't take the results from animals and easily transfer that over to humans. Whereas independent scientists that I've spoken to, and The Intercept and other places who have reported on this speak to, is, the reason you study first in animals is to actually open discussion about how can it affect humans. And in the Ohio River Valley, West Virginia example that I read from in the beginning of this interview, there were at least hundreds of cases of people getting sick and at least 30 wrongful death lawsuits as part of that $925 million that DuPont and Chemours paid out. So when you're looking at GenX here, that's not so different than C8. And the bottom line is, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to try to, bullshit my way through explaining complicated compounds. But essentially, these chemicals are used to create Teflon. It's not just GenX. There are many chemicals that are built together to go into making GenX, which then goes into making Teflon. But the thing that I think a lot of residents are nervous about here, if you watched TYT Politics on Facebook yesterday, there was a press conference, and essentially the city, some state officials, according to them, there's a low risk. They have found a low risk assessment in terms of the level they have found here.
Yeah, and what is concerning about it is low risk based on what? You know, there's not a lot of good science out there about GenX. It is an emerging contaminant, but we know it is a lot like C8, and you know, it seems like we should be using, you know, the precautionary principle here and saying, as far as risk management goes, it's better to be cautious on the front end rather than looking at a disaster and then trying to figure out how to mitigate that disaster on the back end. You know, we should be trying to make sure that this stuff is safe before we put it in the water, rather than waiting for people to get sick and then trying to figure out how we fix that problem.
And what's kind of important, and I haven't gotten a satisfactory answer on why they're allowed to continue operating, that would be Chemours, which is, Chemours was spun off from DuPont in 2015. So when the EPA granted DuPont, you know, whatever the permit to start up making GenX instead of C8, they explicitly said you cannot dump this into the water, into any water body here because of its toxicity. Actually, DuPont had sent to the EPA 16 separate notices. Let me get the exact wording here. My trusty phone. Hold on. Yeah, they had sent 16 separate notices of toxic, basically toxic effects to human health and the environment from GenX. And the EPA gave them the go-ahead anyway, but the EPA did say you can operate, but you cannot dump it in the water. Can you explain how they operate and how they have been dumping it in the water?
Yeah, and just one thing to add on to what you said, those reports that were sent, those 16 reports that were sent through the Toxic Controlled Substances Act, they are required to be sent only when the company feels like there is a significant risk to human health or to the environment. So they would only send those reports when they, you know, based on their independent inside research, felt like, wait a minute, we're seeing something here that could have real impacts on human health and the environment. So, you know, you can probably guess that there's a pretty high threshold there, that companies don't really want to send these reports in, because what they're basically saying, what they're admitting, is that whatever they're dealing with is pretty dangerous stuff, and they sent 16 of those reports in. And so, you know, that's pretty worrisome. I
don't want to interrupt you. It's very important to say, these companies, when they send in these reports, the EPA and the company together, they pretty much redact a lot of the reports, basically in deference to the company, citing tradecraft secrets. So a lot of these reports, you could read them online, but a lot of it's redacted. So a lot of times you don't even know the company's name. You don't even know the amounts or the quantities they're producing, where. So a lot of these reports, the EPA redacts, essentially to give the company tradecraft secret, so other companies don't basically copy their code, which doesn't help scientists and researchers or activists who are trying to find out what's in their drinking water.
Yeah, and to follow up on your question, what's worrisome here is that it appears that there was a consent decree that said, hey, Chemours, you can't discharge GenX into the river, and so, but we know for a fact that GenX is being discharged in the river, and this consent decree appears to, I'm reviewing this right now, but it appears to say that you can't discharge GenX here for this process of making Teflon, but if you shift that chemical over into this vinyl processing facility, you can then discharge it through that vinyl processing facility. So it's the exact same compound. It's going to the exact same body of water. It's being taken up by the exact same drinking water intakes, and it's going down the same throats of the same people that would be dealing with it from the Teflon facility. So it makes absolutely no sense that it would be banned from one facility and then go next door to another facility and be dumped into the river and put into our drinking water supply. It's ludicrous that kind of loophole exists here, and it's ludicrous that the state, that the EPA is allowing that kind of thing to happen. So, and as I said, I have that consent decree now, and I'm going to review that and try to understand exactly, what kind of madness would allow, a chemical to be discharged 25 feet away from where it wouldn't be allowed to be discharged.
And could you kind of talk about approximately how many people get their drinking water from this source?
I would say about 500,000 people get their drinking water from intakes below the Chemours DuPont facility. So around 250,000 people here in New Hanover County, and a number approaching that across the river in Brunswick and Pender counties. There's 2 intakes above Lock and Dam number 1. There's another intake above Lock and Dam number 2 in Bladen County. So I would say it's ballparking around about 500,000 people.
So those are the affected areas, what you just mentioned right now? Those are the affected areas?
Yeah, so those are people that are drinking water below. Now, drinking water is one thing. Just a minute ago, right before we started filming, we saw a commercial crabbing boat go out. So we've got a pretty robust seafood industry in the lower Cape Fear, crab, shrimp, fish. And so the impacts are not just to drinking water, the impacts are to the river in general. You probably have environmental impacts.
From what I was told yesterday by several residents, a lot of that crab goes to Maryland.
A lot of our crab does go up to Maryland, yeah. It's a surprising number of Maryland blue crabs come from North Carolina and the Cape Fear River.
So if you didn't watch the press conference yesterday, dumbfoundingly enough, while they are further studying and further reviewing how much GenX is in the water, the effects, all this, which, by the way, that could take a very, very long time. It's not like you just test it in a week and then you have your answers. The company is allowed to continue manufacturing the chemical and dumping it into the water. So, as I always talk about, we live in a socialist country. It's called socialism for the rich. We live in a country operating on corporate welfare instead of the welfare of the people. Because in what world does it make any sense that if a dangerous chemical that's been linked to cancers and liver disease and immune issues and all sorts reproductive issues for women in this country, a slightly different chemical but with the same characteristics is found in the drinking water for 500,000 people? Yeah, let them continue dumping it in. And by the way, Ty and I have been here a little over a day now. We've gone around, like in Flint, like in East Chicago, like in a lot of areas. Not every resident is aware of what's going on. Not every resident, whether it's because of education, poverty, whatever the case, not everybody knows about the news going on, so people are still drinking this water. I interviewed a scientist yesterday, Dr. Larry Cahoon. He talked about, he's not drinking the water, he's using distilled or bottled water, but for pregnant women, for children, for senior citizens, for people with autoimmune issues, he would strongly advise them to use bottled water. But then we get into the problem that Flint had. Bottled water isn't cheap. So that costs some money to continue getting bottled water to drink, to brush your teeth, in some cases to bathe.